A lively hum filled the grand ballroom that afternoon, where friends, relatives, and co-workers buzzed about in celebration. The scent of flowers and fine wine drifted through the air while waitstaff passed by, balancing trays of champagne. At the center of the festivities stood Thomas, his hands clasped behind him, quietly observing everything. People from every chapter of his life were there. Extended family, dear companions, and former colleagues who had witnessed his ascent over the decades. Across the hall, a few old work friends caught his eye and raised their glasses in a toast. Thomas nodded back, warmth stirring in his chest. Today, he was giving away his eldest daughter in marriage, but this ceremony symbolized more than just her union with her fiancé. It was a living testament to Thomas's devotion, a legacy forged through years of labor and sacrifice. He was husband, father, and friend rolled into one, always placing his family's needs above his own. As he scanned the crowd, he noticed his wife, Scarlett, weaving her way across the floor. Confidence radiated from her every move, her red gown accentuating her elegant figure, hair styled precisely as he preferred. For so long, he had thought of her as the great love of his life. Their 5 children walked behind her, laughing and chattering with the carefree energy of youth. Thomas, Scarlett called as she neared, a familiar smile lighting her face. He returned her grin, a swell of pride filling his heart. "You look fantastic," he said, gently taking her hand. "Everything is perfect today." She nodded, but there was a faint flicker in her gaze, something he couldn't quite place. Then he spotted Daniel, his oldest and dearest friend, chatting with the children on the other side of the ballroom. His kids hung on Daniel's every word, laughing at some joke he was telling. The image reminded Thomas of countless memories. Daniel visiting on weekends, birthdays, vacations. Always so close he was practically family. Thomas's heart felt full. Daniel had been in his life since college, and their friendship was forged by decades of loyalty. Seeing him entertain the children reminded Thomas how grateful he was for such a friend. But his contentment was about to be shattered. Scarlett walked over to Daniel, who paused mid-sentence to greet her with a smile. Thomas watched, perplexed. As Scarlett leaned in and pressed a quick kiss to Daniel's lips, a fleeting but intimate gesture that sent Thomas's thoughts spinning. Before he could fully rationalize what he had just witnessed, Scarlett leaned closer to Daniel and spoke loudly enough for him to hear. "Can you believe he still thinks those kids are his?" Her words struck Thomas like a physical blow. He felt frozen to the spot, heart hammering in his chest as the shocking realization set in. Scarlett's laugh was laced with contempt. "All these years, he's believed the fertility procedure worked. They're yours, babe, and he's even bankrolled this extravagant wedding." Though the room around him still buzzed, Thomas heard only the roar of blood rushing in his ears. His youngest son sidled up, wearing a sarcastic grin. "Uncle Daniel is our real dad. We've been playing nice for him all this time." In that moment, the life Thomas thought he knew came crashing down. He struggled to breathe, and for a second, the dancing lights of the ballroom seemed to dim. Yet, his voice emerged with quiet fury. "This wedding," he said, cold determination seeping into each word, "is over." But conversations halted, the orchestra faltered, and curious, anxious eyes turned toward Thomas. His eldest daughter, the bride, looked over, alarm etched across her features. Scarlett began to speak, but Thomas silenced her with a raised hand. "No more lies, Daw." Daniel, who moments earlier had seemed so at ease, lifted his arms in a placating gesture. "Tom, we should talk privately." "Don't call me that." Thomas snapped, his tone ice cold. "You're not my friend. Not anymore." He turned toward Scarlett, her face draining of color. "How long?" he demanded. When she opened her mouth and only a hushed breath came out, he repeated it, louder, his voice echoing among the stunned guests. "How long has this been going on?" She bowed her head and quietly admitted, "Since the beginning, when we couldn't conceive." Thomas felt a searing pain tear through him. Memories of doctor visits, heartbreak, and hope churned in his mind. He had trusted them both, and they had deceived him so completely. His gaze flicked over to the children, the young adults he had raised as his own. They looked simultaneously guilty and fearful. "I gave you my whole life," he whispered, partly to himself. "My time, my loyalty, everything." His eldest daughter took a tentative step forward. "Dad, we never wanted you to find out this way." He laughed, strangled, bitter sound. "You didn't want me to find out. Period." His voice broke. "You let me believe I was your father, that you loved me." No one dared to speak. Then Scarlett tried to approach, tears shining in her eyes. "Thomas, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake." He recoiled as if her touch were fire. "Love. You think this is love? You have no idea." His children, one by one, hung their heads in shame, and Thomas's final words were quiet but resolute. "I'm done. All of you. Get out of my life. You're no longer in my will. I won't be played for a fool again." A collective hush fell upon them as he turned on his heel and strode out the door, leaving everything behind. The burden he'd unknowingly carried for 2 decades was replaced by a cold, hollow sense of finality. Isolation and aftermath, Thomas returned to a house that now seemed more like a stranger's estate than his home. The silence inside pressed down upon him, reminding him of the void his so-called family had left. But even as he tried to shut them out, they refused to remain at a distance. First came the calls. Scarlett, the children, and eventually Daniel. When ignoring them ceased to work, they began appearing unannounced. One evening, he came home to find Scarlett waiting on the porch. She was barely recognizable, her once flawless appearance marred by swollen eyes and trembling shoulders. "Thomas," she murmured, voice shaking with desperation. "I need to speak with you." He laughed bitterly. "You call it a mistake, but 20 years of lies is no oversight, Scarlett." She broke down, tears sliding down her face. "I never meant for you to get hurt. I thought you'd never find out. I was trying to protect." "Protect whom?" he snapped. "Not me. You used me. You stole years from me that I can never get back." Her tears flowed harder. "I'm sorry. Please, for the kids' sake." "Those aren't my kids. You and Daniel both made certain of that. Now live with the fallout." He yanked the door open and shut it in her face, trying to block out her final, desperate pleas. The next day, it was his eldest son, Marcus, who appeared. Marcus shuffled awkwardly, eyes glued to the ground. "Dad," he began shaky. "I swear I thought you knew. When I realized you didn't, I felt trapped. I didn't want to hurt you." Thomas's anger flared. "Hurt me? You laughed behind my back and went along with their charade. That's not love or protection. It's cowardice. Every child tried in turn." Caleb said he'd only been following instructions. His daughters Lisa and Sophie claimed they kept quiet out of fear. And his youngest, Ivan, insisted he was too little to understand at first. But none of them could undo what was done. Thomas's rage at their betrayal was matched only by his exhaustion. One by one, he denied them entry into his life, shutting his door in their faces and letting them taste the isolation he had felt for years. Finally, Daniel appeared, waiting by Thomas's car as he came home from work. "Tom," Daniel began. "Don't call me that." Thomas interrupted, glaring at the man who had once been his closest friend. Daniel bowed his head. "I messed up. I was afraid to tell you the truth. I was scared of losing our friendship." "Friendship? You stole my wife and lied to me for decades. That's not friendship, that's betrayal. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Thomas let out a slow breath, all warmth gone. "I've heard enough. We're finished here." And with that, he left Daniel standing alone, closing the door on their shared history. With every frantic visit from his former family, Thomas's resolve only hardened. One night, sitting in the quiet of his study, he decided enough was enough. He would take control of what remained of his life, and see to it that the people who deceived him felt the repercussions of their betrayal. Hiring a private investigator, Thomas started compiling evidence against Daniel's business practices. He had long known Daniel to be an eternal risk-taker, but never had he expected the extent of his shady dealings. Soon enough, the investigator laid a stack of documents before him. "It's worse than we thought," the investigator explained. "He's evaded taxes, channeled funds through dubious partners. The entire operation looks precarious." Thomas flipped through the folder, feeling a grim satisfaction. Forward it to the authorities, and keep track of his assets. If they freeze them, I want to know the moment it happens. A day later, Thomas got a phone call. "Sir, Daniel's bank accounts are being scrutinized." Once the press got hold of the tip, his investors began pulling out. Thomas thanked the investigator. This was only the beginning. Soon, Daniel's desperate attempts at damage control backfired spectacularly. Clients abandoned him, his company's worth plummeted, and articles tarnishing Daniel's name circulated widely. Meanwhile, Scarlett's life dissolved rapidly as Thomas filed for divorce and cut off her access to his finances. She sold jewelry, bags, and clothes just to afford a modest place to live. One evening, she knocked once again at Thomas's door, looking broken. Gone was the polished woman who once glided through life with effortless poise. "Thomas," she whispered, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "I'm begging you, I have nowhere else to go." He regarded her without pity. "You want mercy now. Where was your mercy when you lied to my face for years?" Tears slid down her cheeks. "I was scared. I never wanted to lose you. I thought somehow it would work out, Bot." "That's the difference between us," he replied. "I spent years believing our future was built on honesty. You spent years building a facade." As he gently but firmly closed the door, Scarlett's sobs echoed in the hall, yet his heart felt only a muted pang, far overshadowed by the memories of her betrayal. Daniel attempted a similar tactic, leaving voicemails that dripped with regret. When Thomas finally picked up, Daniel's voice wavered. "You ruined me, Tom. Is that what you wanted? You did that to yourself." Thomas answered, unaffected. "I just made sure your lies saw daylight." "I've lost everything. Can't we talk this out?" Thomas's voice hardened. "There's nothing left to say. My life is moving on. You aren't part of it." But he hung up. There would be no second chances. In the months that followed, Thomas experienced a strange, liberating calm. No more daily confrontations, no more secrets. Instead, he renewed old friendships, gradually reconnecting with people he drifted away from during his turbulent marriage. That was how he reacquainted himself with Linda, a compassionate woman he'd known long before Scarlett. Their first meeting was casual, a shared cup of coffee and laughter about days gone by. But a spark of possibility glimmered in Thomas's mind. Linda's presence was gentle, never invasive. She never pried about his past, content simply to enjoy his company and offer understanding. Thomas found himself sharing painful details he had kept locked away. And instead of pity, she gave him genuine support. One evening they strolled by the riverside, and he reached for her hand. "I haven't felt this at peace in years," he said quietly. "I thought I was done hoping for anything real." Linda smiled. "You deserve to be happy, Thomas. You just needed the right space and the right person to remind you." Meanwhile, rumors circulated about Scarlett and Daniel's ongoing downfall. They struggled financially, burdens piling higher than ever. Though Thomas heard about their plight secondhand, it scarcely affected him. Any sense of personal vengeance had faded. He simply felt the steady satisfaction of moving on. One late afternoon, he answered a timid knock at his door. Scarlett and Daniel stood there together, looking utterly defeated, unkempt, exhausted, and eyes brimming with shame. He stepped back, allowing them into the living room in silence. Scarlett's voice came first, frail and quivering. "We've lost everything. The house, the business, we have nowhere else to go." Thomas's face remained impassive. "You're here to tell me I've won, that I've proven my point." Daniel spoke up, voice shaking. We were wrong. Tom, we deceived you. But you've destroyed any chance we had of getting back on our feet. Can't you show a little compassion? Compassion, Thomas repeated, a bitter edge creeping into his tone. Tell me, where was yours when you made me believe I was raising my own children? When in fact they were yours. Daniel! Scarlett tried to bridge the gap between them. Thomas, I know you'll never trust me again. But I truly did love you. You loved an illusion I provided for you. He retorted. You loved the perks, the lifestyle, but you never truly cared for me, not enough to be honest even once. She stared at the ground, her voice cracking with desperation. Could you ever forgive me? His paws stretched painfully. I can't forgive a decade of betrayal. I've built something new for myself, and it doesn't include either of you. Her lips trembled. Daniel let out a resigned breath, and together they turned toward the door. Before leaving, Scarlett glanced back with a final plea in her eyes. But Thomas's unyielding expression made it clear that no words would undo the past. When they were gone, the house felt quieter, but that calm now carried a gentle sense of closure. The next morning, Thomas woke with the dawn's light spilling across the bedroom. Beside him slept Linda, her face peaceful in the early glow. He watched her for a moment, a quiet gratitude growing in his chest. Her presence was soft and steady, everything he had been missing for so many years. Later, they shared breakfast and prepared for a day of travel plans. They had decided to tour Europe, an adventure Thomas had only fantasized about in another life. Holding hands, they ventured out into the world, discovering new places and allowing themselves the freedom to savor each moment. In a cafe in Rome, Linda took his hand and smiled. You look different. Lighter. He returned her smile. I let go of all that pain I was carrying. I never thought I'd trust again, but here I am. And there, in a sunlit corner of a foreign city, Thomas realized just how far he had come. He had lost what he thought was everything, only to rediscover something far more valuable: peace, self-respect, and a love built on truth. For the first time in his life, he felt truly free, and he had no intention of looking back.